Lauren. I am here from the Art Gallery at Arlene's, and I'm excited to go live with you today and share with you the show, The Land of Infinite Possibilities. So I'm going to flip my camera around and walk you through. So I'm super excited. Thank you for being here. I've got a little bit of background here about me, and there's a QR code right here to another video that I did that I will post in anyone who might not be watching this live. But this is another video I did prior to the show going up that kind of talked about some of the backstory behind some of these pieces. So it gets a bit emotional, be forewarned at the end there, but you can also check that out if you like. But today what I figured I would do, and if I'm a little jumpy, bear with me, I am going to just take you through each of the pieces and tell you a little bit about them. And if you have any questions, I will see what I can do to try and monitor the chat. But if for some reason I can't get to you when I'm live, I'll definitely respond afterwards. So I'm actually going to give you just a quick little visual scroll here. There are 20 pieces in the show, but I want to start with a piece that's over here in this corner. And this is the painting that's called The Land of Infinite Possibilities. And I wanted to start with this one because this was really the inspiration for the entire show. So this show is a culmination of the body of work that I created during my 10-month residency here at Arlene's. And I had created this piece a couple of years ago, and I had titled it The Land of Infinite Possibilities. And as I was putting together the pieces for this show, I kind of looked at them side by side and realized that they were all these different types of landscapes of one type or another. And when I was looking at them next to each other, I realized that they were all part of this world, this land of infinite possibilities. And so I wanted to have this piece in the show, even though this was created before my residency, because it really was the inspiration. And it's such a great example of my process. So if you look really closely, this is acrylic, and pardon the glare. And this, as most of my pieces, started out as just play with acrylic ink. And acrylic ink is a fluid medium. It's acrylic, but it's in liquid form. And so when you put it down on a surface, it flows and creates these really beautiful organic shapes. And so what I do is I just play and I make a mess. And then I wait for something to emerge. And this particular piece, what emerged was this landscape. And what I love about it, and what you'll notice about almost all of my pieces, is there's usually very bright colors, but a lot of texture. And if you look, you might be able to see, if I can capture this on the side. I don't know if the light's going to get it, but there's a lot of texture in these pieces. I love to use mediums that have lots of different viscosities, thicknesses to them. And there's lots of layers. And so sometimes bits and pieces of what's underneath kind of shine through. But one of my favorite things about this painting, let's see if my camera can focus. If you look through this little magical doorway, there's a whole landscape back there. So it just keeps going. And that was the inspiration. There's a little butterfly right here. And funny story about this piece, when I paint my pieces, because they start out as these abstract kind of messes, I change the orientation as I'm painting. And for the bulk of this painting, I was actually painting it in the upside down orientation than it is right now. And as I paint, I flip them around just to see what I see. And when I turned this one over, I realized it was a landscape. When it was upside down, it looked like this kind of interesting outer space looking thing. But it emerged as a landscape, and I love that the trees kind of form the shape of a heart. Hearts show up in my work a lot, so that was kind of fun. So that was the start of it. So as I was painting these paintings, and I'll just kind of come up and show you different ones as I'm talking, I went through and noticed that they sort of fell into three different categories. And I love trees. I paint trees quite regularly, in fact, pardon the glare. In fact, if you look at my work, there's a good portion of it that is trees. And I was looking at these pieces together, and I noticed I had several pieces that were trees. And I kind of think of the trees as the watchers. So part of the reason why I've been fascinated by trees is I love the idea that they operate on a different time scale than humans. You know, I grew up in California, and the redwoods and the sequoias, they have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years. And that just blows my mind. And so I think about all the things that these trees have witnessed over time. And I just think that's amazing. So I like to think of the trees as the watchers. And I'll talk right here waiting for you. Let's see if I can get a good image without the glare. But this one is done in acrylic ink. So the whole thing is acrylic ink. And if I turn to the side here, maybe that's better. And I love the different kinds of marks that I can get. It almost looks like watercolor, but it doesn't move as you add layer upon layer. And so I really, really love that just organic kind of flowy shapes that you can get. Another thing I really love is oil paint and pigment sticks. So this piece is called Golden Hour. And if you look at it from an angle, let's see if the light can get it. I use a lot of gold oil paint in this one, and it just sparkles, especially in low light. And talk about texture. Let me see if I can get a side angle of this for you. Like you can see the big chunky bits of paint on here. So this piece is 18 by 24, and it started out as a canvas with acrylic ink on it. It was like fluorescent pink and black. And I just sort of made a bunch of marks, and then it sat there probably for a few months until I saw something that sparked my interest. And often what I'll do is I'll call it making a big move. And what that means is that I'll have a surface that's got something on it, and then I'll just, with a big brush stroke or a big drop of ink or something, I'll make a big mark. And I did that with this piece, and all of a sudden I saw the foundation for a tree. And so that's where this one came from. What's really interesting to me about this piece is the background of this piece reminds me of a specific place on the 5. If you've ever driven on Interstate 5 through California, between Northern California and Southern California, there's a specific place on that road that this reminds me of. And when I was growing up, I used to drive that road all the time. I grew up in Northern California and went to school in LA. I lived in LA for 10 years, and I drove that road back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And all of these pieces are created from imagination. So I'm not using a photograph or a still life. I just kind of paint. And what's been really interesting for me to observe through this process is that what I'm painting is what I saw. It's what landed and stuck in my subconscious. And a lot of that is what I saw driving through California growing up. So it was really cool to see that come out in these pieces. The other thing I really love about this piece is this frame is made from white oak. And my hubby made this frame. So this is an 18 by 24 canvas that's 1.5 inches thick. And I could not find a float frame that would fit it. I couldn't find one commercially made. So my hubby's a carpenter, and he will often get reclaimed wood. And he said, I have some beautiful white oak that would be a gorgeous frame for this. So he handmade this frame and several of the other frames that I'll show you in a minute in the show. And so that makes it extra special, I think, because it's sort of handcrafted painting and handcrafted frame. So that's Golden Hour. This one is called Breathe Free. This one found its home. This is another one that is acrylic ink. So I love to use acrylic ink to make these kind of fun marks and just let them play on the surface. So this is on a wooden panel, 10 by 10. This little guy right here, I just love this nugget. This is a 4 by 4 inch piece, also acrylic ink, and I call this Find Your Path. And this is one of the ones that's in a walnut frame that my husband made. And I just love, y'all look at the grain on that. And I love the little imperfections in the wood and all the loveliness. That just makes me super happy. So these are the Watchers, all of these beautiful, lovely trees. This little guy up here is called After the Storm. It found its home as well. That's also an acrylic ink one. So as I was doing this work, I had the Watchers, which are the trees, but then I also kind of got into this process of creating these florals, and I call these the garden. And the way that I created these is similar to the others that I've created, which is usually acrylic ink. They start as acrylic ink, so there's a few different ones in the garden series. And then what I do is I find shapes in there. There we go. I'm having some internet connection issues. Hopefully that will get us back live. But another custom walnut frame there. So some of these are on canvas and some are on paper. And I really love to use watercolor paper because you get just that flowy, organic movement from the ink. And this one is, you can kind of see the texture of the paper. I just love that. And then of course I've got some fluorescent on this one, which I love. So that is the garden. And this one sort of sits in between. It's a landscape, but it's also kind of this floral. So this texture, this one's called Go Your Own. You can see the texture on that. This is acrylic on canvas, but I love to use different mediums that help bulk up the paint and give me lots of texture. And then I love to like dig into it and carve into it. This has a lot of palette knife work in there, so you can kind of, so that's Go Your Own Way. This is another floral. We'll get to these figures in a minute. This one I call Afternoon Sunny, and this is oil and cold wax. So kind of you might have guessed that I don't have a specific medium that I always work in. I love to work in all different kinds of mediums, and oil and cold wax is one of my favorites because the primary theme, as I mentioned earlier, in all of my work is texture. So color for sure, but texture plays a really big role. And with oil and cold wax, what you can do is create all of these amazing textures. So the orange that you see is actually the background. This is on an 8 by 10 panel, which is wood. And so I paint over it, and then I carve through the oil and cold wax paint to get to the background. And so the orange that you see is actually where I've carved the paint away. And then this has that gorgeous gold oil paint that was on the tree Golden Hour. And then you can just get these really fun textures. And then when you buff it really lightly with the soft cloth, you get this really lovely sheen. I just love oil and cold wax. It's one of my favorite mediums to work in. So that's Afternoon Sunny. That's got another walnut frame, which is really fun. And then this piece is called Let Love In. So this is 16 by 20. This is acrylic on a wooden panel, which is something I like to paint on. And this too, you can just see all the texture in there. I don't know if you can pick that up. It's just like going to town with texture. This has acrylic ink as well. That's how the trunks are made. And some of these little surprises. And the figure showed up there, and there's a little heart. And this piece actually found its home right before the show went up. One of my collectors just happened to see it on my easel in my house and was like, oh my goodness, that's my painting. And so we hung it in the show because it's part of the show, but it's already been purchased. So there's that. I do have prints. So if you see anything that you love, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I do make prints of my work. So that was popular yesterday, prints of this one. A lot of people are loving the sunset there, and just the texture and the lighting is really fun. So I'm going to come back over here because there's a couple more over here. All of these have white frames, and I'll see how close I can get. This one is called I Would Walk 1,000 Miles, and you might hear some songs in some of the titles of my work. But this one was super fun to create. This is a mixed media piece that started out as a watercolor, and I added oil pastel on top. So again, primary theme for me, texture. And I love the way the oil pastel kind of catches on the top of the watercolor paper. This is on cold pressed watercolor paper. It just creates these really lovely kind of textures and the clouds, and it just sort of takes you out into the distance. And I love the softness of that one, super fun. This one here is watercolor, and this is called Tending the Garden. So I love to do these kind of fantastical sort of scenes. And if you look really closely, there's a figure in there. And sometimes these figures just show up in my work. And when they do, I go with them. They're there for a reason, and often there's a story that they want to tell. And so I really love the way this one came out, and the colors. And you know what inspired me with this one, usually when I sit down to paint, I'm sitting down to paint for one of three reasons. One is I'm inspired by a color that is just calling to me, and in this case it was that violet color. The second reason is I just feel the need to watch paint move. I love to paint, and I love watching it move. I love watching watercolor and acrylic ink and all of it, and sometimes I just want to push paint around. The third reason is I've got something I need to work out, and my body needs to make certain movements to get out whatever needs to come out. And so a lot of times that'll be a start of a painting too. But this one was inspired by that lavender color. And then right here is another one of the watchers. This one is called I'll Always Watch Out for You. And this one started as acrylic ink as well. And if you can see really closely at the base of that tree in the distance, there's a little figure. So this is literally the tree watching out. So that's the garden and the watchers. Let's talk about the third element of this body of work, and that is the inhabitants. So as I mentioned earlier, I've got different figures that show up in my work from time to time. And as I was putting the work together and I was noticing these different themes, it was like, okay, if what I'm creating is this land of infinite possibilities, and there are the watchers and there's the garden, well, all these figures are like the inhabitants. These are the figures that tend the garden, that wander through the landscape, that just kind of look out for each other. And that's kind of how I see how everything fits together. So this one is called All We Need Do Is Listen. And this was acrylic ink. And again, with that mark making that I love, and just sort of that loose, sort of fluid texture, and that sort of cherry wood frame. I don't know, there's something about that frame that I think looks so pretty with this piece. So that is all we need to do is listen. This is Golden Girl. Again, another acrylic ink piece. You can see the acrylic ink is and how it just moves. Like this little corner looks like watercolor because of just how the pigments disperse, how they play with each other. But she showed up as well. So I'm just making marks, and then these shapes appear and I'll see something in them. And so when I say these figures show up, that's what I mean. And so I saw this girl, this face, and she had this like kind of crazy hair, and she's kind of got this a little bit of a geisha vibe going on, and I just loved it. And I loved this orange color, and it just this theme, like orange showed up a lot in this work, which I thought was really interesting. So she's got golden jewels in her hair. So that's Golden Girl. And then the last figure is what I'm calling Ride Like the Wind. And there's kind of an interesting story about this horse. So I don't sit down to paint specific things typically. And I've never painted a horse. I've never sort of been inspired to paint a horse. It was just never top of mind. But again, this is acrylic ink, and you can kind of see how it plays together there. I saw the shape of this face, and I looked at it, and I was like, it's a horse. That's what it is. And so when these figures emerge, I usually go with it and just bring them out, bring them to life. And what I realized about this probably very recently was where this horse came from in my subconscious. So I kind of was like, okay, horse, I guess I'm painting a horse. This is what it's called. Intuitively, I get my titles for my work, and that's what I got, Ride Like the Wind. And as I was realizing, looking at this work together, that these were all scenes from my subconscious, I was reminded of the fact that when I grew up, across the street from our house was an open field. And in that field were horses. And my mom and I used to walk across the street and feed the horses. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's where she came from. It was in there from my childhood. And it was just such an interesting revelation that so much of these special moments just came out and emerged. And I just have to share one other thing with you that I learned last night. So in addition to the show that's going on here at Arlene's, there's something called the Flat File Program. And the Flat File Program is a series of works by different local artists, and they're all unframed and unmatted, and they're meant to create opportunity to purchase work in a more accessible way. And last night was the opening for this, as well as my show. And I met this artist, Sarah, who is just lovely, and she does collage work. And as we were talking about my work and her work, we were talking about her pieces. And this piece in particular, I looked at it and went, oh my goodness, this vehicle resembles almost exactly the vehicle that my parents had when I grew up, and for like the youngest part of my childhood that I can remember. And that's the vehicle that we would drive around in and look at the scenery that inspired this work. So how amazing is that? That here, completely separate artists, somebody I'd never met, had almost the exact same vehicle that that I would drive around in. It was just incredible. And Sarah's work is amazing. I highly encourage you to check her out, as well as Rich and all the others. I mean, all of this work is really incredible. You can see part of that on the website, and I'll put a link to Arlene's and the gallery there for you. But that is the show. And so there's 20 pieces here, all coming from a different place in my imagination, all meant to inspire and remind us that the world is infinite and full of possibilities. None of this work is perfect. None of it is precise. All of it is quirky and imaginative and fictional and doesn't always make sense. And that's life. And so I hope that you find something here that inspires you. I hope that you continue on your own artistic journey, whatever that might look like for you. I believe we're all artists and all creators, and there's always a way to express yourself. So thank you for joining. If you join me live or if you are watching this after the fact, I apologize if there were some glitchy internet connections there. But definitely reach out, leave a comment, let me know if you liked this sort of vloggy type experience, and I'm happy to do more. I'd love to hear what you think. And also, I'd love to hear if you leave a comment for me. I'm thinking about in November doing like a live again, but doing a demo from my studio where I can kind of walk you through the process that I use. And you guys let me know if that's something you might be interested in. But I'll leave a link in the description below. If there's anything you love or anything you is calling to you, you can always contact Arlene's. They'll ship domestically if there's something that you would love to have. And you can always reach out to me if you're outside of the US. There's Prince, and I wish you a wonderful day and weekend and life filled with love, joy, and magic. Take care.